But before I left, I remember there was this boy, Elita Johnson used to live in a house behind that house. And this boy came there and said his commanding general wanted the house and we must get out of the apartment and everything else. And and by that time I said, I'm not leaving. I said, I keep running up and down, I'm not leaving. I said, I'm not moving from here. And he said, okay, I'll be back. And he left. And then I heard that a friend of mine was in the Mama Point area, and I sent a note to say that what had happened. Anyway, they said that they would see what they could do. You know, some names I don't want to mention because of, you know, and whatnot. But anyway, I stayed there, and then eventually, I think it was Boto Jones, who, when the Echo people came, had some friend or something, and they were able to carry us, and we left here and went. But the whole point of the thing is, this government here, like I say, has been the height of my whole mental mind. I remember very well, and they had an interview with Jenkins Scott. If you remember, there were 2 or 3 persons who were also beheaded around that time on the beach. And they were talking about it. And one reporter asked him, but how about Robert Phillips? And he said, oh yes, and one Robert Phillips. I will never forget that statement. Oh yes, and one Robert Phillips. One Robert Phillips? You mean to tell me you couldn't remember that Robert Phillips was beheaded? You didn't know what was happening? Everybody was pretending like it was, you know, it was like, you know, thing of the past. Anyway, that portion passed. I came back. I was in and out, in and out, in and out. But I tell you something when I say one of the things that prompted me to come to TRC. You know, I've been in the Liberian government for a lot of things. You go to the courthouse to talk about issues, they drag you up and down. The lawyers there don't want to take certain cases because they know it's a waste of their time. But I would say that 2 judges who have been very helpful in cases, you know, Judge Holder, Judge Meska, Omer Meska, you know, and whatnot. But what happened, before I get to that point, during the stay where I was at Mama Point, I decided that I was not going to let my brother and my mother's death go by. So I decided I was going to go to BTC. And everybody kept telling me, Roberta, everybody know you. You don't know the people over there. You don't know. But you know, when you have a whole lot of hatred in you, you have a whole lot of bitterness in you, believe you me, nothing matters. And I think this is why God put it in a way where he made certain faces to just disappear from me. I went down to BTC and I met Commander General Hezekiah Bowen. You know, when I got there, I sat down and told him to sit down. And I will never forget, this soldier was sitting down there. He said, yeah, some of you are sitting down here. When Taylor was coming, you were saying, let Chucky come, let Chucky come, let Chucky come. Tell her that. He said, now Chucky finished coming, and some of you ain't got a house to live in. And I said to myself, you're right. But you know, it was at the time that movie had come in, that with a demonic and baby, you know, and toy called Chucky, you know. And for some reason, it just became a catchy face. Everybody kept saying, oh, Chucky coming, you know, and whatnot. But anyway, General Hezekiah Bowen called me in. He asked me, he said, what happened? And I explained to him. When I explained it to him, he said, okay, go back and put it in writing. I went back. I sat down that night. I put it in writing. When I came to the office the next day, he said to me, okay, let me get somebody to type it. I said, no, I can type it. He took me in the room. He said, let the Reverend sit down here and type this paper here. Nobody Muhammad. So I typed it and I gave it to him. He told me to come back. When I came back, all of a sudden I saw Tilly. You know, Tilly was some of my size kind of thing. He was a small man. And the twin said, Colonel, you gotta leave your gun. Oh, he used a few words. He said, blah, blah, blah. He walked in the place there. After a couple of minutes, General Bowen sent for me. So I came in. When I came inside, I tell you, when I looked at Tilly from head to toe, I could feel my whole inside. I could feel the hate. I think if the hatred had power, it would have probably killed him then and there. And then he said, I know that this woman here saying that I killed her man and blah 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 and what McCoy and whatnot, and he stormed out of the office. And then General Hezekiah Bowen said, I was still looking at him in a way. And then he said, Reverend, he said, that's all right, sit down. And I said to him, I said, I wish you had prepared me for this. I said, because when I saw the man just now, you know, a whole lot of things flared up. He said, Taylor can't do nothing to you. Anyway, I was in and out of his office. One time I heard that Tilly had been killed on Center Street. I jumped out of the house and I'd be doggone, I was going to go see Tilly's body. And I remember Wesley Johnson. He asked me, he said, Mamish, where you going? I said, they finished killing Tilly. I got to go look over his body. He said, Mamish, let's go home. I said, no, Uncle, he was to call him Uncle West. I mean, he's younger than I am, but he was to call him Uncle West. I said, Uncle West, I got to go see Tilly's body. Anyway, he managed to talk me out of it, and luckily he did, because it wasn't Tilly. Another time, I told my sisters, by that time now we have moved up there, I told her, I said, look, we're going down to BDC. And I said to her, I said, you know what? We got as far as Joe Richards' building on Mama Point. I said, I'm not going. I got a funny feeling, so I'm not going. Sister Roberta, I said, I'm not going. I'm going back. Luckily, I went back because that's the time BDC was attacked. And they had to run, you know, all over the place. But later on, eventually, I went there when I found out that, what do you call it? I could get some information. When I went out there, I saw my Peugeot parked in the yard. So when I went to Hezekiah Bowen to go talk about everything, I said, my car is parked in the yard. I said, but I bring in my papers for my car because I have my papers. The next day I brought the papers for the car. He said, Reverend, that's all right. I know if you say your car, yeah. When you go carry it back, the time I got to the office, the man said, you're talking about car here, the car here, I said, we're going back in the office. I said, because I'm not taking no. You know, I was really hyper, you know, and everything was just, I mean, I just didn't want to hear no, you know. Anyway, we tried to move the car. We thought it was battery. I put battery, it wasn't that. So my daughter's father said, look, let's push the car over. You know, we entered BTC, there was a building on the right-hand side. He said, let's push it on the side, we'll leave it there. The next day, the late Maxwell Carter came with a blue pick. I said, Carter, you got to help me out, you know. And then we hauled the car out and carry it to where the Guinness Stout place. And that's where I parked it and whatnot. But the whole thing is, time heals certain things, but certain things cannot, you know, cannot be healed. I didn't go for a while, and then one day I went back to Hezekiah Bowen. He said, but Reverend, what happened to you? I said, oh, I said, Taylor were trying to kill you. No, he said, I said, Taylor. He said, Taylor, we're not going to kill you. I said, Taylor were trying to kill you. Because the story we heard that when Taylor went there, at that point, Hezekiah Bowen told him, nobody might enter the building with weapon, you know. So apparently the boy told him, said, leave your gun. And he said, that's the story we got. He said, no. He said, well, either your mammy or my mammy will wear black today. And then apparently Taylor shot the man. The other man took him, cut him here, you know. And what they did was they cut him here and put him on fire. But it was a light rain that day, so his body didn't burn. And BTC was in an uproar. So I told General Bowen, I said, so I was not coming there. But basically, I would say that is what the story is, you know. And another thing that prompted me to come to this place here was the incident that happened last year, October. Last year, October, I went to, in 2003, I had been having problems with a piece of property behind my mother's house. Somebody had put blocks on the property. I went there. I went to the courthouse, and they gave me somebody to go there to go bring, to go serve the person the notice that they must come to the court. And they served the notice, and the woman never came, several times. This is one of my receipts, where you pay for the fees, for the person to go. And they never came. And they had it up and down, and then eventually she moved the blocks that were on my property and built on the property next door, which is Nathan Ross's grandmother's property. And later on, I went back again, decided to put a mud house up there. One Mr. Calabar went from City Hall, said, "Oh, Reverend Phillips, if you gave me $100 for logistics, I can get the people off the property." He never did. He never did, up and down. I wrote a letter, which I have a copy. I wrote a letter to City Hall.
Witness? No, I'm just trying to draw your attention to what you are explaining. If it does not directly relate to what you have said earlier, we want to spare you the labor of explaining it, because it happened last year and the mandate of the commission doesn't.
But what I'm saying is, the reason why I brought it up, because I made a formal complaint. Like I said, my brother was being followed and nobody did anything about it. I made a formal complaint last year, October 3rd, to the Justice Ministry to say that my life had been threatened. My life had been threatened. And every time I asked for that, nobody would say anything. And eventually, I went down there and I carried a letter. When I carried a letter, they carried the letter inside, and the man brought the letter outside and said, "Oh, Councillor Gongo said that's a land issue. Go to the court." And I said to him, what part of this letter here, it says land issue? The letter said my life has been threatened, and you want to do nothing about it? So anyway, I called my lawyer. My lawyer called Councillor, and he said to me, my lawyer said he will look into it. But I just want to say something here. It says here, for and on behalf of my client, Roberta A. Phillips, we have the honor to bring to your attention a matter involving serious life-threatening situation and to request your timely intervention with view to avoiding things. Reverend Phillips is, but life-threatening. Then you come back and say this is a land issue. What my concern is here, so I said, did you read that letter? Did the Gonglo read that letter? Someone is threatening my life. And from last year, October, nothing has been done. And then I decided, okay, I met Sienna and Johnson there one day, and I told her, I said, you know what? I'm going all step by step on this matter here. Then I decided, I said, okay, I'll go to the Minister of Justice office. When I got there, the man said, sorry, but you got to come back either on Monday or Wednesday to make an appointment to see the minister. This was on a Thursday. I said, I have to go and come back to make an appointment on a Monday or Wednesday to see the minister? I said, but let me talk to the secretary. I stayed there for 45 minutes. The secretary never came outside. There was a fellow from finance who had carried a file. He said he had carried a file so that he wanted to explain something to the secretary. He couldn't see the secretary. You hear me? Then I called him, Councillor Emmanuel James. I said, I'm in your brother-in-law's office. I say, and I explained the situation. I say, I'm surprised that I cannot even get the secretary to make, because what happened was, when I went to the house, to my property, when I passed, I saw them building again. And I stopped by. When I stopped by, I got a thing. He started, I said, if you just touch me. Then somebody told him, he said, don't touch the woman. He told me, he said, let me tell you something. You come back on your property. If I don't kill you, He said, he put food on the ground. He said, and I will eat it. That's what made me take this thing to the Justice Ministry. October 12th, nothing has happened. So I'm asking myself, what will happen now if something happens to me? Who is going to be responsible? It's going to be the same thing that happened to my brother. When my brother was being followed and the government did nothing about it, and the government was the one who was following him. When I bring my life-threatening thing to Conglo office, and he tells me that's land issue, what part of that letter I read said land issue? So what happens now? Then I go to the minister's office, and I can't even get an audience with the secretary to make an appointment. What happens to me? What's supposed something happens to me? Who's going to say what? I just want to show you that as far as I'm concerned, this government has never been there for my family, and as the size now is not there for me. Because it doesn't matter to Congo or anybody else if I die today or tomorrow. What is it to him? What has this government done to say about Robert Phillips' death, my mother's death, my 6-year-old daughter who graduated? What has the government done about it? That's why I didn't want to come to the TRC. Because I felt nothing was going to be able to do about it. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You put our lives in a stake. We're supposed to come to you. I didn't go there for no land issue. I went there because the letter is clear. Life-threatening. You know what I mean? Even one time I asked Aaron Milton to go there. The man went there. Okay? He cursed the man up and down. That's not his property. That's my property. Even the other day I went to go do my taxes. We took the people down 14th Street to another place. The man went, I said, hello, how you doing? We can't, the tax people can't look at the place to do the estimate for taxes. All of a sudden the man said, you come out here, I will bust your car. The tax man was with me. Bust your car. What is this for being threatened right here? Nothing can happen to it. So, I realized that some people, Roberta felt like it's not worth anything. But I have a family. That my life is very important too. That my life means something too. And my government cannot even protect me. That's one of the reasons that prompted me also to come to TRC, because I can see before nothing was done but Robert Phillips there. And for Jenkins Scott to say, oh yes, and one Robert Phillips. Oh yes, and one Robert Phillips. What was Robert Phillips' crime? Where's the protection? So something happens to Mary tomorrow, and then they'll say, oh, you know, Reverend Phillips was in the TRC that day, and she was talking that thing there. And what comes of it? Not a single thing comes out of it. Because you know what? If the court has sent for me, sent a notice to me, and I didn't appear, they would have been sending a whole lot of police behind me to go bring Reverend Phillips in. But how many times I went there? How many times I paid for them to go there? The woman went there. The woman never showed up. And what did the government do about it? Not a single thing did they do about it. And you know, sometimes I wonder, every time I leave this country, I wonder, why am I coming back here for? Why am I coming back here for? Because I'm in a country that does not protect me. No, Louise, no. You know, I'm in a country that does not protect me. It didn't protect my mother, it didn't protect my brother, it didn't protect my father. It was the cause of my father's death. Because the minute Emma showed that paper and implicated Robert, that was the ticket of Robert's death. And what happened? Because of Robert Phillips' mother. Then you want to tell me what? So my life now, Justice Ministry is telling me what? When I saw Emmanuel James and his wife in the supermarket, I said, oh, so he said, I called him. He said, but anyway, Rebbe, you know what to do. What to do? Then you say we must stay in this country and do what? With our lives at stake. Then you say, well, do what? I'm here by choice. Not because I have to. I'm here by choice. So when you're trying to tell me that I'm supposed to forget this choice and leave here, what is actually my, you see, the law has no protection. And I'm talking about strictly from my experience. The law has no protection. You go into somebody's, get on somebody's land, and they say they're up and down, But if I get on somebody's property, you'll have me fly in a minute. Why? What's the discrepancy? What's the difference? Yeah? Who is there to protect me? Then you talk about human rights. The rights is only on one side. They talk about human rights. In the great America, they have the lethal injection. They have the gas chamber. They have the electric chair. You know, people get away with murder in this country here. When Tolbert started hanging people, were all like, amen. But it served the purpose. People commit crimes in this country and nothing happens. Nobody bothers. It constantly happens. Look at all the armed robbers around here. One example needs to be made. My life is at stake here. So that I can't even go back to my own property that I own. I can't even go to it. Why? Because somebody threatened my life. And I know if I go back there, you will not be able to protect me. But I tell you something. If it's the last thing, God be my helper. If it's the last thing, that property, it will never bring him no good luck. Because I will continue to go after it. I don't care what it is. I will continue. Just on the doggone general principle, I will go after it. It's mine. It's mine. Rightfully mine. My brother was killed for nonsense. My mother was killed for nonsense. My 16-year-old daughter was killed for nonsense. My uncle, the whole bash for nonsense because there was no protection. Anyway, that's the gist of what we let you know. There's much more, but anyway, I think I've said enough to bring the point home. I will drink it later on.
Thank you very much.
You have any questions for me?
Yes, ma'am. I want to thank you very much for coming and laying this bare before the commission, and I'm very confident before the entire country. You try to expose what happens when individual citizens are left without protection and become vulnerable. We appreciate it, commissioners. We ask some questions, but I wish to redirect you to some of the things you said so that we can fill in dates and events. Can you kindly tell us the name of your mother?
My mother's name is Georgia B. Coleman.
Do you know her year of birth?
1920.
Thank you. The trial of your brother Robert Phillips, do you recall the year?
It was February 1986 that they were taken to court. They were in jail at Post Sackett from November, and then the case came up in February 1986. Yes.
Can you kindly tell us the year and perhaps date he was killed?
He was killed January 4th, 1990.
To his memory, can you say a little bit of him apart from what you said that he was an engineer? What was his public life? Was he a politician? Was he involved with a political party?
Robert was not. He was associated with. He was a member of the Lab Party. But Robert was quote unquote what you call politician. No, but he was a member of the Lab Party.
Going back to Emmett Hammer. You said Emmett Hammer said he was caught cheating and they had a tally. Does it mean he was representing a political party at the counting of the ballot and it was his private tally notes he took?
It was. It was his private talent. You know, like you sit down there and they say one vote for John Brown, you mark it. One vote for Billy Joe, they mark it, you know. And this is what all of them were doing at the table.
All the pool watchers.
Yes. That's what they were doing. And it was, I think it was either 17 feet or something, between 15 and 19 feet, you know, distance between. It was a required amount of footage between where all the political parties sat to be able to verify the counting of the votes. Between that point and where the votes were actually being, you know, like from here to there. The votes are here, over there, and everybody's sitting at the table. That's where Robert was sitting. When Emil Hammer walked up in here and took his copybook.
And I guess he was representing the Liberia Action Party.
More than likely he was there for the Liberia Action Party.
Did you personally get to know your late grandfather?
Oh yes. That was say, it's funny. People say 11 years old, what could you remember? But when something happens to you, you remember. But the average 11 years old couldn't remember. I remember my grandfather every weekend, just about. He used to, my mother left here and went away to college. And when she went away to college, she left us with our aunt. And my grandfather was a family man. He used to pick us up. Send the driver. He had a Fisher 10 license plate. He used to send the driver to pick us up and carry us to the farm. Okay? And then later on, he would come with it. We spent many weekends with him. In fact, Robert, even though Robert was the third grandchild, we always would say that we were Grandpa's favorite grandchild. Robert had the keys to places that, even my grandmother didn't have keys to, But he spent many weekends with us. And we were living down here on Coma Hill, over here. We lived next door to him. I remember my grandfather very, very well. I remember certain things that he taught me, like sometimes when I'm sitting down, my children saying something, and I say, you know what, my grandfather taught me certain things. If wisdom ways ye wisely seek, 5 things observed with care. Of whom you speak, to whom you speak, how, when, and where. His law office was here on Coma Hill. And I tell you something, I remember no matter who was in my grandfather's office, his grandchildren were allowed to go in. And he would say, gentlemen, wait, I have to see what my grandchild wants. And I remember what made him teach me that poem was, I started to talk about somebody. And apparently the person's relative or something in the place, But he taught me that thing. Be careful who you talk to, when you talk, how, when, and where. Because you never know who you're talking about, who is present. All of us knew, we were the first set of grandchildren. I was the 4th. When he died, I think we had 58, but I'm the 4th.
Can you recall the political atmosphere at the time, and did you at that age understood the circumstances of his death?
Oh yes. Oh yes. I remember, like I said, we're living here on Coma Hill. His house was on the place, we were living down there. And I can't remember the woman's name, man, but we were aware of what was happening, And I remember my mother telling me, she said, that's why she always held guilty because of that. She said that my Uncle John was not a politician. He said, I'm a civil engineer. He said, I've come home with my family. I don't want to get into politics. And he said, he told my grandfather, he said, look, he said, if something happened to you, he said, there won't be anybody there, and I will have to stand by you. And my mother apparently was the one who called my uncle to say, your father, our father is having problems and whatnot. And he got out of his bed to go and find out from his father what was happening. And that's why I say, for 9 days, my mother never said nothing to us. She just sat there. She just sat there. She never said, until Louise Samuels told her, you got to get up from that place. Think about your children. And I remember, at that time, we had very few friends. I remember May Roberts. Both 1956, 1955, and 1919. Mother May Roberts. When everybody had deserted my mother, she was there, up and down. Even my mother used to sew. People didn't even want to buy anything from her, 1955, because she was Georgia Coleman. That's the atmosphere. That's the atmosphere we're living in. My mother was teaching me how to sew at the time. So I used to help to sew. Nobody wanted to buy anything, And that time, May Robert had her beauty parlor right here where Swiss Gallery used to be. And she used to take the things there to try and sell it for my mother. 1990, with Robert's situation, she went there almost every single day to my mother to find out how she was doing. In the heat of everything, she went there. That was one of the only friends that I remember my mother had. And like I say, when they kept saying the Coleman children, that's my mother decided that she was not going to let us grow up in that atmosphere. But sometimes you look at bad, but years to follow, you look at the good. I think if we had stayed here, we would not have had the exposure that we had. I remember one time, Fat sent for my mother and my aunt. And they came home. I think it was in a March month. And he asked them when they were coming home. And my mother said, well, I have my daughter in the States, and I'm not coming home. I was due to get married sometime, not too long after. But I remember he said to her, Diana, he said, when I look at you, he said, I can tell what you're thinking. He said, but Georgia, he said, just like you look like your father, it's how deep you are like your father. I remember her telling me that, But my grandfather was a family man. There was nothing, there was no work that came before his family. And his grandchildren was most important to him. Most important. We spent many weekends. He would send us up, and then he would go later on. Sunday afternoon, he would send us back, and then he would come back to Monrovia. Yes. I remember every bit of it.
Thank you very much. Commissioner John Stewart will ask questions.
Good morning, Madam Witness.
Good evening.
And I'd like to say sorry, even though it's been quite a long time, but you can still feel the anguish you feel. So I'd like to say sorry again. And permit me to just ask you one or two questions. And what I've listened to you say is you painted a picture of what our country was at a certain time in history, especially we're talking about ostracization. Now, when your grandfather was killed, you said you were about 11 years old. I suppose you attended the funeral, did you?
Oh, yes.
My understanding is that there were no government officials that were allowed to attend. I don't know from the best of your recollection. Do you remember any government official attending his funeral?
I don't remember it at all. In fact, like I say, I remember that day it rained. I remember it was a very quiet funeral in Clay Ashland. And I remember David Riches, the late Winston Riches' father, officiating. I remember my mother wore gray. I remember it very well. I don't remember what I wore, but I remember where we sat in the church. I remember all of that.
And so afterwards, when you went to school, it was a hands-off, don't touch, those are Coleman's children. Was this the general attitude of people in government circles and among the other members of society?
For us, we were children, and this was apparently what the parents were telling the children. And this is what made my mother decide that she was not going to leave us in the situation.
Would you remember whether at any time the governor of Liberia extended any apologies or so to your family for what happened
No,
at that time?
I don't remember. And you know, the funny thing about it is, there was a book published, it's a red book. It was published during the time of Nathan Ross, when he was, I think, mayor of State of Monrovia. It's a red book. And, there's always a caption about my grandfather, who tried to assassinate, the President Tolbert. There was always that little niche, you know what I mean? As if to say it was an identity.
Okay, if we should move fast forward to 1989, 1990, can you recall who were those officials of government responsible for security at the time? Can you recall the names? You mentioned Edward Massacre, you mentioned Wilfred Clark. Do you remember any others?
Not really. I remember Wilfred Clark because, like I say, my brother had written on the toilet paper that Wilfred Clark they were torturing him, his testicles, okay? And that he had made the statement that if Robert did not implicate President Sirleaf, that even the American government would not be able to get him out. I remember that very well.
So in other words, Mr. Clark, a top security functionary, was standing there watching your brother being tortured, which is, torture is against the Geneva Conventions. I'm not so sure whether there are particular portions of that convention that were applicable at the time this incident happened. But in effect, what I'm understanding is that Mr. Wilfred Clark, a top security functionary, was standing there and acquiescing to the torture of your brother, and then going further by making remarks that if he did not implicate someone, not even the Americans would be able to save him.
Yes, my brother told me that, and I believe it, because he would not, there was a relationship between my brother, my mother, myself, where we told each other everything. If we wanted to know, we could ask. And he told me that he wrote it out.
Did your brother say to you who else that he remembers seeing, who else was on the scene besides Mr. Wilfred Clark that may be alive today?
No. He just made that statement, and I do not remember anybody else's name at all. I just remember the statement that he made. Like I say, it was a note, but that statement, I remember very well.
Do you recall the date on which this torture is reported to have taken place?
It had to take place between the time he was in post-stockade, and he was in post-stockade from November to February. I don't remember exactly to say pinpoint, but it was during that period. It was not after, because when the case started in February, when they brought them to the Temple of Justice, okay, then Councillor, what's his name, Horace, Councillor Horace, Councillor Finlay, they were the lawyers for them, okay? And then they asked that they be transferred to Central Prison. So it was between November and February, but I cannot give you a specific date.
That's November 1985 to February 1986.
Yes.
And this took place at the post stockade.
Yes.
Now, if we move forward to 1990, you say your mother's or your brother was killed on the 4th of January 1990.
Yes.
And did he live in proximity to where you lived?
No, I live on Coleman Avenue, corner of Coleman Avenue and 14th Street. Robert lived on, you know where Casablanca is?
Yes.
The building they keep giving to Judy Bryant, which is not. That's where Robert house was.
Now, you remember, as you mentioned, the killing of Van Richards and others. But was the killing of Van Richards, did the killings of Van Richards precede that of your brother?
Oh no, Van Richards, in fact I will tell you even the date, because I remember it was June 9, 1990. It was at the wedding of Father Emmanuel D. Hodges, the late Father Emmanuel D. Hodges. And Van had come to the wedding. I remember he was wearing like a grayish looking suit. And the reception, it was, what's her name? Sylvia Hammer's house, then Sylvia Hammer's house, okay? And I remember when he was leaving, you know, all laughing, he had a funny way of strutting, you know, and whatnot. And we said, look at that man, where he going? You know, he leaving us. And that was the last time we saw him. He left straight from there, and he went to Clay Ashland, and it was he, what do you call it, Christopher Ricks, Coleman, Jimmy Coleman, and I forgot who it was. But I remember after they killed him, I think they put him in the water or something. But when we finally found out about it, we went to JFK, the back of JFK morgue. You know, they had put it in the papers where they had the bodies on top of each other, and the water has swelled the bodies, and they had them on the floor packed up. And what happened is, to bury them, we had to bury them the same day. What happened was, they got plastic, and they wrapped them in the plastic first, okay? And then they wrapped them in a white cloth, okay? And they just put them in a casket. But the bodies were you know, deteriorating.
And this June 9th wedding that you attended, that was after some killings had been reported at the United Nations compound, if you recall, in 1990.
Yes, I think it was.
That was
That
was after that period.
I remember seeing on TV the UN compound thing, and where this girl was, if you remember, she was jumping up and saying that yes, Doe was there. I don't know if you remember, if you remember the film that came on. There was a young girl who was accusing him that he was there, you know. But I remember seeing it on TV.
Now, at the time your brother was killed, were there, besides the footprint that was seen on the door, and you already mentioned that you called the security, you alerted the security that morning, and there was no response until about 3 o'clock.
Okay, I don't remember whether it was my cousin Aaron Milton or what. I physically did not alert them, but one of the family members did. Okay, and we sat down there waiting for them to come, and we didn't move the body. We could not move the body because they never came until around about 3-ish. before we could move the body.
And when the authorities came, was it police officers or was it soldiers that came?
I remember the pathologist that came first. Okay.
Dr. Isaac Moses?
Yes, the one who has a law degree, the different degrees. Okay, and I remember, I think there were a couple of plain clothes, but I left at a certain point because I wanted to go back home. But I remember my mother saying that she was not going to move until they had finished with the body and they had taken the body to strike up before she would leave. And that didn't happen until around about 3 or a little after 3.
And do you remember whether any pathological examination was done to determine actual cause of death?
Okay, it was obvious from the eye that the cutting of the throat, because like I said, I got down on my knees and I could see the inside of, his pipe. I could see the inside of it. And I know very well that Robert had been hit on the head because you could see the bruise of the scalp. And like I said, those lift with dumbbells, okay, were in the room. And apparently they must have used, I think they used one of them, the smaller one, and that's what they hit him with on the head. But the cutting of the throat was definitely, the bruise on the head was just a bruise, you know what I mean? Where the flesh was, moved, but that wasn't the cause of death.
So if there was any examination done, you were never furnished a copy of the report?
No, I asked later on, much later on, what's his name? Dr. Moses, if I could have copies of the pictures. But it was still during that period of time, and I guess he was hesitant, in giving them to me, so I never saw the pictures that were taken.
Do you recall who was in charge of the police at the time?
I don't really remember, but I do remember that when I was saying to you earlier, I don't remember when I wanted to leave the country and they wanted to sign the papers. I remember Wilfred Clark signing. I forgot who they I can't remember. I can't remember, but I remember all of them signed the paper because nobody wanted to be the one person to sign, you know what I mean, and say this person was responsible. And I remember they asked everybody to sign.
And you made a comment at one point that somebody said, remember, Mr. Robert Phillips is the grandson of Mr. Coleman. Was this was this remark made by a government official? And would you have reasons to believe that what he suffered could have been on account of what his name was, that he was the grandson of the late
David
Coleman?
No, I want to believe, first of all, like I said, Robert's issue was an issue of his own, okay? But the statement, I don't want to say, it is alleged who said the statement, but I don't want to call the name because I did not hear it with my own ears. But apparently the statement was made that they should always remember that Robert is the grandson of David Coleman. But Robert's issue was one where, like I say, my father's death was a clear issue of publicizing, in the papers, that my younger brother was dumping votes. In fact, Robert was a photographer. He was a civil engineer, okay? But his hobby was photography. The lens that you have on it. At one point, Doe took it up to say that what Robert was going to put on the gun to be able to shoot him with some stupid statement. My brother, when I spoke to my brother last night to find out certain things, he reminded me of that statement.
Now, there were a lot of speculations, I remember, following his death, that he would not have opened his door had he not been called by somebody whose voice was familiar and whose voice he recognized. Is there any truth to this?
We heard that Robert had to have opened the door for a familiar voice. Okay?
Was there any evidence of a break-in into the house, that the door had to be smashed open, or he opened the door?
From what my observation was, okay, apparently he might have started to open the door and looked like there must have been some hesitation or something. But I remember seeing that big boot print that stamped the door. Okay? You could see it clearly. Clearly on the door, it stamped the door. Okay? So it looked like, if I can remember correctly, the latch was not properly closed. So which meant, my thinking is that it looked like he was going to open the door, but when he realized it, before he could close it, that's when the door was slammed. And like I say, I remember, you know, the small, that slim gunshot, that's the size of a pencil, okay? And it has a point on it. It's about this long. It has a point on it. I remember it was in the room.
From what you're describing, it would appear it must have been an unused round.
Yes, it wasn't fired.
It was not fired?
No.
Was there any evidence that bullets were fired in the house, like any penetrating marks on the walls or something?
No, I didn't.
In the bed?
I did not see any bullet, use of bullets, okay? But I know that knife was used because my brother's throat was cut, and I'm not citing because apparently you could see rubber footprints, okay, when he ran from the bedroom. This is what attracted my eyes and my mother's eye when we entered the place. When we entered the bedroom, okay, we could see straight through to the living room, and we could see the footprints. It looked like he had stepped in the blood, you know, and that was the indication of the footprints going in, and that's what we followed. But then we looked on the wall, like I said, we looked on the wall, then we looked down and we saw all the blood, and then we followed with our eyes, and eventually when we turned, Robert was like, we were here and Robert's body was like here.
Did the neighbors report any sound of a struggle, like people attempting to break in the doors, or may have heard voices that they probably recognized or saw any of the people? Did you get any report like that?
Okay, I think I remember vaguely when I went outside, like I said, whenever I don't have any recollection of how my mother and I got off the mattress when I'm holding her. Well, the next thing I remember was being outside, you know, walking up and down crying and saying that, you know, whoever did this, you will wonder tomorrow how I got over this day. And I think I remember it was a young girl. And she said, hey man, I feel so sorry for her, you know. And then later on we found out that people were saying that they had heard the noise. What the story we got later on was that the door soldiers had come there earlier. Robert was not there. And the boy who was there, the houseboy who was there, they told him, don't say anything. Okay? And then later on when Robert came home, okay, that's when Robert met the people, you know, when he went in and everything else, that's when they came. And this boy here, you know, the funniest thing was, he was the son of the cook for my mother.
Is he still alive?
Oh no, they killed him in 1990. He was killed in 1990. And I remember, now that you reminding me, I remember the incident where Zillie's nephew, I think they call it Flecko.
He was killed, accused as an armed robber. That's the same person?
The Flecko that was, I understand, was
from 16th Street, yes.
On 16th Street?
From Cinco, 17th, 18th Street area there.
I don't know where Flecko didn't get killed during that period.
No, I mean recently,
I know I heard somebody got killed around or the old post office or somewhere with some money business, I think, and somebody was telling me that, it was Flecko. But it was Zillie's sister or son. He was, they were all friends with my children and everything else. And apparently he entered the house that night also. He entered the house that night.
Were there any items taken away from the house after the killing, like personal items? Did you see, notice, for example, his drawers, chest of drawers being open, or his suitcase, or his wardrobe being open, or paper scattered, or they just went to kill him and just leave?
They just went to kill him because the video set was there, okay? Nobody touched it. The TV was there, nobody touched it. It was all there.
Did he have money about?
No,
nothing was touched.
I don't know, and I don't know about any money and whatnot.
Now, who were some of his very close friends living in that vicinity that probably may have gone to him or gone along with his attackers that would have prompted him to respond to a familiar voice to open the door? If one would theorize that this was the situation, that a familiar voice called him and going there, pulling the door ajar, and may have seen unfamiliar faces or people with guns, and then realizing that they were after him and tried to close the door, and this footprint stamp on the door pushed as if to push the door back. Is there anybody who you remember who was that close to him?
Nobody that close to Robert lived around there, really. Not that I can remember.
What was his relationship to the late Mansili Yanse?
My brother-in-law, married to my sister next to me.
Where was he at the time this happened?
He was in Liberia.
Okay, again, I hope you will bear with me because this happened during a painful period in our history, and there are just so many stories abound as to what actually happened. And our responsibility is to decipher through all of this to uncover the truth. So I hope you don't mind my questions.
No. Go ahead.
Again, there were these stories that he was called out. That's why I asked, are there, or do you remember any of his friends, associates, or what did you hear in the wake of his killing about who may have gone to the house to have called him? And did the neighbors identify anybody? Could they remember seeing anyone, describing anyone? If they did, could you share that with us?
Well, next to where Robert lives, which is like, say, Casablanca area, is the French Institute, okay? And as far as I knew, there were no friends of Robert's there. And we had, and I will not call names because I cannot ascertain that they were, okay? The other names that I have called, I've called them because I know that was for a fact. We heard later on that it was either one or two persons we heard name. One was a man and one was a woman. Okay, I don't want to remember, I don't want to call. My brother-in-law was one of those names that were called. I cannot say that, for a fact. And there was another lady, she's dead now. And but I cannot say for a fact.
So, from the picture I'm drawing, it's
Sorry.
From the picture that's been formed in my mind,
yes, I'm listening.
It is clear that the door was not actually broken into, even though there was a footprint on the door, but the door was not broken in.
It wasn't broken in because, like I say, it looked like he started to open the door or something, But before it looked like it could slash it back, there was a force.
And do you remember whether any police officers went back to inquire, to ask questions, to do an investigation, and were you contacted, or any family person who was living there at the time contacted to assist the investigation?
Like I said, nobody came to find out anything. And even to the point where when Jenkins Scott would say, oh yes, and one Robert Phillips.
And was Jenkins Scott Minister of Justice?
Yes, he was.
At the time?
And he was given a press conference, and they were asking him about those people who were beheaded on the beach, and they were asking him, questions. And no mention was mentioned of Robert. And then one reporter said, how about Robert Phillips? He said, word for word, oh yes, and one Robert Phillips.
Do you recall who was the director of the Special Security Service at the time? Was it Edward Massaquoi?
Edward Massaquoi, I don't remember. I remember before 1980, Edward Massaquoi was in the securities. And I remember, we also played cards together, whist, together. And I remember 1980, when the new regime came over, they were looking for Edward Massaquoi. Okay? I remember somewhere around the city hall, they were looking for him, and he was running away from them. Now, eventually, how they sorted out that problem or whatnot, he came back into government. But I remember very well, because all of us were very concerned at the time about his safety. But I remember afterwards, he got into how they did it, how they didn't do it. He was back into the security service.
Okay, now if we should move forward a little bit by a few months, can you tell us which month your mother and other members of your family were killed?
This August 26th, we're making 19 years that they went into my mother's house, and on the morning of the 27th, they marched them out. I will never forget it.
Were you there when they were being marched out of the house?
I was in my house with my other two daughters.
And you were watching?
Yes.
Can you recall who were those who were taking them out? If any of the faces you can recall?
No. It was pitch dark. It was pitch dark.
Do you remember any voices?
But I want to believe it was the same group of people who came that night, earlier that night, when I climbed over the fence to go and find out what they wanted. And they said they wanted to know who all were in the house. If we were checking to find if we had any rebels or any dissidents in the house, And I said, no, only the family. He said, how many? And I remember telling him, and I think I added maybe a person or two in number. But I remember them asking. But I remember the following morning, there was a man, he walked with a limp. He walked with a limp. And I remember attacking him. When I said attacking him, not physically, but verbally attacking him and accusing him of, because you could see where they had gone to my mother's house, taking the things out, like fabrics and things like that. You could see the remnants of it that had gone to the building which was owned by Mark Riches, which is opposite where I lived. You could see that, that things had been traveled from my
trail.
Yeah, the trail from there to there. When I made that remark, he said, okay, I'll come in.
Is he still around? Is he still alive?
Like I say, God has blessed me that most of those faces, even if you put people Slanger before me right now, I couldn't even tell you what he looks like.
Now you say Slanger. What about Slanger?
And Slanger was supposed to have been, he came to the house that morning.
Oh, he came to your house that morning, following the...
To my mother's house.
To your mother's house?
I mean, to my brother's house.
Oh, your brother's house?
Yeah.
Oh, he came to your brother's house along with another person asking...
And I think the man's name was Johnson. I don't remember. But
is he tall?
Tall fella.
Is it Samuel Johnson?
I don't remember. Like I say, as much as I knew Slanger's face now, if you put it before me now, I can't remember it. But I remember he wore a fire shirt. It was a cream. A fire shirt. I remember that.
Now, so concerning the details of your mother's killing, can you describe what the situation looked like around the time of her killing? Were there a lot of people in the neighborhood? Had others in the neighborhood been killed? Were people moving out? Were people in a state of apprehension, for example? And you mentioned that Tele had moved next door.
Yes.
Can you remember any name that was associated with him there, or any of his regular stream of visitors who used to come in and out? Would you remember?
All I remember is that at the time Tele moved in, Solo Pepe, his wife, his old mother-in-law, and I think they said it was 7 persons disappeared.
Means
Okay.
Solo Pepe who used to own a big shop on Kerry
Kerry
Street.
Street. I don't remember his real name, but Solo
Mr.
Pepe right by that
Brunel,
African
Brunel.
hotel. You know it?
His name was Brunel.
I don't remember his name, but I remember Solo Pepe because from a child, growing up in Monrovia, we used to know Solo Pepe had a last shop.
I remember his son was my classmate
Yeah.
in elementary school.
And then after that, we then, like I say, I actually saw Maype Green and her husband, okay? And like I said, she wasn't feeling well. She wasn't feeling well. And later on, it was a black Jeep that went around the house. And I was asking this army man who had the pharmacy, if I check around, I can get his name, who had a pharmacy.
Is he still alive today?
Oh no, they killed him. But the funny thing about it is, in my private collection, I have, when I went back to my house, his ID card fell in my house, where he had gone to my house and looked like he was looting my house, and his ID card fell down. I have it.
You still have it today?
Yes, I have it. I have certain things I have in America for safety purposes. I still have it.
Is it possible to have a copy of that? A
You have
replica
to
of
wait
that?
until I go back to America again.
Yes, I mean subsequently. And there is no recollection as to who were those that took away Mr. Green and his family and the others from...
Taylor was the only person in that neighborhood who were acting up. Taylor was the only person. Nobody else was there except civilians.
But
In fact, a friend of mine, that next morning, she had a mild stroke from what happened to my mother's house that night.
say she had a what?
A mild stroke. She had a twist in her mouth.
And how would you say that the government officialdom, whatever it was at the time, would you say that they were aware of the killings that were going on in the Cinco area? Would you say that the military command of the AFL that was responsible for security in Monrovia, as well as the other security agencies, would you say that they were aware that all of these extrajudicial killings were occurring and nothing was being done?
There was nothing that would make me feel that they were not aware. Nothing that would make me feel that they were aware. They were aware. And like I said, my brother was being targeted from ever since. He was being targeted. My brother was kidnapped by the Liberian government. He was kidnapped in the middle of the night. I told you. And when they took him, we couldn't find him. I drove all over that night looking for him until 4 o'clock that morning. We couldn't find him. Police station to police station. And the next day, when my brother Lamb went to the police, to the barracks, they had a place on the left-hand side. He found Robert there. By the time he could come back and tell us about it, they had moved Robert. Why did they move him?
So finally, how would you like for your brother, your mother, how would you like for them to be immortalized? How would you want to memorialize them?
You know,
and if I should extend that to your grandfather, how would you want to see history record your grandfather? As a villain, as we have been taught to believe, from the plot that failed, that book was written, and all of
I have that book.
As a man who stood and died for his convictions, as a victim of political repression in Liberia? What?
You know, like I say, you know, when you're involved in something, you remember. Paul Dunbar, who was supposed to be a marksman from this distance here, which was the distance was less. You mean to tell me he would not have hit his target? Tell me. As far as immortalizing my mother, my brother, and whatnot, they will always be in my heart. But I tell you something. The only grave that I have is the grave of my brothers. And because in the family plot there, they buried over my father's grave, they buried over my sister, my aunt, my stepmother, they buried over all of it. And I always say, Robert's grave, luckily for me, I didn't do what I wanted to do with it. Because they busted it in it the other day. But I always say, put anybody in that grave, Roberta Phillips, would dig it out, I would knock it down. I'll tell you of that for free.
Is he buried on Center Street?
Yes, it is. The other day I went there, I didn't realize it. They had broken in there, I think, to take the seal or something else. And the casket is all demolished and whatnot. But I remember that reminds me of one thing. I remember after this whole thing, when Robert, was in this trouble back and forth, I remember one day I was working at 15th Street in Cinco, the Episcopal Church office. And what can be his sister name? His sister. Not Mira, the ones who work to, people who work with her in the papers. Kenneth Best, Bera Best. We used to work at the Episcopal Church office. And I remember, this was not too long after my brother had died. And I didn't want my mother driving. Okay? And she said she wanted paint or something. And it would cross the bridge. I said, okay, Mama, we'll go and get it. And as I was going, God is my living witness. When I was going down Center Street, when I passed where Robert Grave was, the area, I just had this funny feeling. And I just backed up. Mira was in the car with me.
Mira Best?
Yeah, Bera Best was in the car with me. I told her, let's go. And we backed up. I jumped out of the car and I ran to Robert's grave. And I looked at it and it was intact. But when I turned my head, I looked at my father's grave. And when we buried him, Mrs. Shaw, Eugene Shaw had made, the chair for him, and we put it in the grave. I noticed the chair was outside the grave. So when I went to the grave and I looked inside there, they had burned my father's body. I think they must have thought it was Robert's grave. They burned it.
The grave was desecrated?
Yes, they burnt it. They took the chair up and they burned the grave. I could see, pieces of, we buried him in the uniform. Okay? And I remember I was so upset, I went to Bishop Brown's office down here at Trinity Cathedral, and I was crying. And I went to him, he asked me what happened. And I told him. He said, Roberta, he said the soul been gone. He said it's just the body. And then we asked Jojo Jones later on to please come and just close the space up. And he did. They must have thought it was Robert's grave when they saw, Phillips on it, because up until the day Robert's grave, at one time we brought Phillips on it, a couple of years ago, but if you look at the grave, you don't know where it is. But I went there recently, and like I say, anybody buried on my brother's grave, I will break it down. I'm not even going to go to the law. I will break it down.
Now, after all these traumatic experiences, and from what you're saying, do you feel a sense of bitterness?
The beautiful thing about my whole life, some of these faces, like I said, they have been blocked out of my mind, out of my vision. And like I say, the 23rd Psalm, I know I'm walking with some of my enemies, and I know I'm speaking to some of them, but God is protecting me. But the beautiful thing about it is, when you have a family life, my mother, my brother, and I, ask anybody, we're like sisters and brother. We were like sisters and brothers. We knew about each other. We knew what would happen, what was happening and what not. Okay? And when I think about, certain memories and whatnot, and I laugh, because they were pleasant memories. But sometimes, like I'm talking now, there's a bitterness in it. But I tell you something, God has brought me through, put all of those things back behind me. I was able to occupy my time. I went back to school. I got me 2 degrees. One bachelor's, I graduated Magnum. The other one, I graduated cum. I went back, I got me 2 masters. All of that to occupy my time. So, it's a moment thing. Like now, it's a moment thing. But nobody's going to hold me down in hatred. Nobody. Because I will be over whatever they can do, I will be over them.
So has your appearance here before the TRC, has it in a way brought closure to the very painful memories you've been carrying all along?
No. You know what will bring closure? When something is finally done. Like I said.
So you like to see justice?
Oh yes. Look, I remember the day buck naked came running down the Temple of Justice Hill. They had run me from my home already on Mama Point. I was at what was my name house, man? No. Anyway, I was on Mama Point, Emma Hammer's girlfriend place. West Silver Oasis.
Can you describe the area, Mama Point? I grew up in Mama Point.
When you're going up, there's a green building. Then at Mama Point, when you're going up Benson Street Hill, there's a building on the right-hand side has the green behind Jimmy Pierce's house. Jimmy Pierce.
The Page? The Page residence?
Not Page. Anyway.
It's right after Studio Hotel?
No, it's further down. Soon you cross, you know what, Joe Richard has a building right there on the corner.
Where Giddings?
Then there's no, you know, when you cross over Newport Street, yes. You have Joe Richard's building.
Yes.
Then you have Francis Greaves' mother, where Francis Greaves' mother lived.
Yes.
Then there's another building.
Martin. Levi Martin?
Yeah. Yes.
The tall building?
No, it's a house that has a front, it has an upstairs porch.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's no. Anyway, I can't think of the woman's name, but that's what we had run to that morning. You know, we had run to April 6th, okay? And I saw buck naked coming down that hill, buck naked, like this. You know, I mean, like. And then later on, after the war, everything else, right here in this center here, one day I parked my car. I was going to the bank. And I said, who's that over there? And they said, buck naked. I said, buck naked why? He said, oh, he's changed and he's preaching. And I stood up there for maybe a couple of minutes and I just shook my head and I walked off. And I left. The memories are there. They will never leave in a sense. But the protection that I have is the fact that these faces will not haunt me. These faces will not haunt me. And the memory that I have of my brother, my daughter, and my mother It makes me laugh when I think of certain things, we used to joke about and whatnot. Nobody's going to make hatred so much in my heart that it will bring me down. It cannot.
So until you have justice, foreclosure.
The day I would love to see everybody brought to justice.
But we're talking about extending into the reach of history. What would you say about your grandfather? In what way you think justice could be secured for him, his memory?
Well, my Uncle Othello came and he made his statement. And I think it should be corrected that, like Uncle Othello was saying, I didn't get the whole thing because of the radio was grinding. But I think it's only fair that, people tell the truth of what happened. I remember I had a picture of the two bodies lying down in BTC. At the time, they had a wire fence. I don't know how old you are to remember it.
Yes, I remember the wire fence.
They had a wire fence in the 50s. Okay? You could see straight through place. And when where you enter now, that gate that you enter, it was right on the side there where they had the two bodies lying down. My uncle's body and my grandfather's body. Okay? They had it lying down there. I will never forget it. Uncle Tommy Lomax borrowed that picture. He never gave it back to me. But I will never forget it. I remember it very well. Somebody needs to come and say something. But the law needs to put things right. Nobody can put things right except the law. The government has to put it right. But the government is not interested. Just like I say, they're not interested in man's safety. I bring a matter to you almost 1 year, and you can't tell me nothing. You can't tell me, you can't even have the courtesy to even get me an appointment. And I expect the government to do what? That would be.
So finally, given all your traumatic experiences, have you had the benefit of any psychosocial counseling, any traumatic stress relieving type of counseling?
I remember after 1990 we moved up there. I think the only thing that kept me going really was the fact that I had children. I had 3 children to look after. I remember one day I washed my hair. My daughter was, fixing it for me. And she said, "Mommy, your hair is white." I remember from the, I had been combing my hair something like this, one like this. But when she was going through it, from here straight on down was white. And the funny thing about it is, eventually, just how it turned white, that's just how it came back to its color. I remember when I went to America, Hillary Dennis's wife, Liz Garber Dennis, she's a doctor. And she said to me, Roberta, I think I need to carry you to get a complete physical. And I said, Liz, she said, no, I'm carrying you to go get one. And we went, the doctor examined me and everything else. And apparently she told him, why she had brought me. And he said to me, you know what, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that you're still in your sound mind. But like I say, God is wonderful. And I often wonder, I said, why was it my brother that got killed and not me? And you know what? Just here the other day, I realized, I said, if my mother had been killed and I had been killed, I am certain as I sit here that Robert would have made every attempt to kill Doe. I am certain. I am very certain. And it would have just ended up where the whole stock would have been ended. I am certain. Because Robert was a family man, not only to his own family. Like there are old women around town that could tell you about Robert. He found time to go and visit them, carry them one bag of rice, carry them their money here, there, and yonder. Robert was a family man. This is what made his wife concerned that night when he didn't come home. He wasn't at home, And she said, it's not like Robert to stay out of the house like this, only to find out they had kidnapped him. But I assure you, if it had been Robert's mother, myself, and whatnot, Robert would have ended up dying because he would not have rested.
Thank you very much.